Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. We're here pacing towards the end of our first full season, excited about starting off season 2 in May, and I'm here with my friend Tony Ponturo. We have been having a lot of fun, and I hope at least sharing some wisdom, creating some wisdom, and learning some things as we go through the year. It is the Wisdom Circle. It's available wherever you enjoy your podcasts. We love any kind of promotion and distribution of these. So thank you for being an audience member, and good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Ray. We have come a long way since going back and forth whether we should do the podcast. We have at least some proof that we're not talking to ourselves. So that, and guests keep showing up. So at least there's a pulse. And as you say, it's about giving back, sharing information, and I know I've learned a lot myself, and I think you have as well.
Absolutely. No, it's. I was talking about this yesterday with a future guest and his team. That from 24 years old to 74 years old, we have hit probably every decade, every generation, and there's always been some sort of learning on both sides, or more for one than the other, but always learning and growing and giving back. So it's doing kind of what we thought it would do, which is always nice.
A quick anecdote, which the audience won't know, but I was giving you a hard time in our setup, that how some of our guests have to get cleared by their PR department. And you said, well, they are representing big companies, Tony. And I can remember Mark Lamping. People may or may not know that name. He's now the CEO of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And he left Anheuser-Busch first before he was brought back to be president of the Cardinals to run what was a now defunct CBA, Continental Basketball Association. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, what's the difference between working at AB and now this startup league or whatever? And he said, you will breathe a sigh of relief when you do PR and you're only representing yourself, not a big company. So I should have been sensitive to
that. Yeah, absolutely true. I learned that going from ABC to Raycom. I'm like, wow, what a difference. Yeah. But here we are, and we're excited about our guest. Our guest, who will come on in a few minutes, is Bill Bergefin. He is the head of marketing and creative for the Yes Network. Bill and I were in separate orbits, but kind of connecting once in a while, and then we super duper connected at some point in both of our careers. So I am really excited about talking to Bill. Master marketer, really smart dude, and boy, his journey has been really interesting. So I think we're gonna have some great things to talk about. But before we do that, so there's some tariffs being charged to. I mean, I get my shirts and stuff, and I always see "Made in Vietnam." I might not be able to afford a shirt soon. So, and Jim Cramer's talking about a market crash. So, this is such crazy times.
Yeah, I think it really is, and I think it's like any sort of classroom sort of process. It's like if this happens and this happens and this happens, it could be why. But the world doesn't really work that way, and we're seeing countries push back. France now has said we're not going to invest in the U.S. And, the consumer gets impacted. Having worked for a big company for a long time, even though we were sensitive to pricing, one of our arguments to government when they wanted to put a bigger excise tax on beer was, well, who do you think is going to pay for that excise tax? We may not pass it all along, but we're going to pass some of it along because you want to, and that means jobs, that means less rice, less aluminum, less glass, whatever. So it does have an effect. You cannot hide behind it. We talked about the automotive business, and the union man saying, well, we have empty, factories in Detroit. Well, more than likely they're going to stay empty, we got to be careful here. We don't want to get too political, but when I worked at Anheuser-Busch, we closed 2 breweries when we had 99% capacity of volume because we could put it into other breweries because technology made the other breweries more efficient. So you still closed a factory, even though the economy was strong. So nothing's a given, and we're going to take a little ride here.
It is truly kind of head scratching time, right? I mean, Jim Cramer saying we're going to have a market crash. Howard Lutnick, who's no dummy, ran Cantor Fitzgerald department. I mean, he's Secretary of Commerce. I mean, so he is all in. And so it's kind of like, whiplash of like, they're not stupid people. They're not all stupid people. Some of them are very smart. And it's just hard to tell which way the wind's blowing. And then stories about factories, right? It's going to take 3 to 5 years to stand them up. And who knows where we'll be in 3 to 5 years before we're actually making socks in America again. And you just don't know. If now the Fed's talking about cutting the rate 5 times this year, June, July, September, and November. So if they cut rates and then we change our mind on tariffs because just kidding. Well, the Fed has just changed. So it's a lot going on. And I think all we can do is persevere. I mean, Americans are great at, I guess it's a little bit of what I remember being, keep calm and carry on. Taking that from the UK. I don't know.
Well, we've seen in business, it does not work. And now R.F. Kennedy Jr. said, I made a mistake with some of the cuts with the HHS, so now we got to bring some of these people back. It's sort of the rough shot that bothers me as a business person, right?
Yeah.
And we had someone, I won't name the name, who after the 96 Olympics said, hey, we can cut $100 million. No one will notice it. It's like, well, we argued, well, wait a minute, the consumer will notice it because $100 million is a lot. Yeah. And this person was convinced, it was a financial person. And 2 months later, the board is saying, why don't we see any Anheuser-Busch commercials? So I get called up to the board meeting and it's like, well, because we now have a net present value of media budget that goes back to 1977 because we just cut $100 million out of it. And they said, put the $100 million back and don't let anyone ever tell you to cut that budget again. So it is noticed. There's always people that think they're the smartest people in the room. God bless them. But if they're not in that part of the business, they're not the smartest person in the room.
So I can't wait to bring Bill out because he's sitting there saying, yeah, so you mean like when you advertise, sales go up and when you stop, sales go down? So that's fun. But the part that brings us to the pre-Bill introduction is this idea of transferable skills and how and no one has more or more effective than Bill. Literally, one of the things that I think you have to do is kind of stay focused, stay open. Don't try to hold the club too tight, as they say on the golf course. I should do more of that. And so, what are some of your thoughts on the transferable skills?
I think when I did some consulting for executives and more importantly, the Columbia and NYU students, I would say strongly, build your foundation of experience, right? Because you will transfer that experience to whatever you end up doing. And realize that I didn't realize 40 years ago when I went to BBDO and said, I'll be here 40 years. And Bob Levinson, who had department, said, shut up. You'll work here 3 years. This is going to be your MBA, and you'll work for 10 different companies. Well, it wasn't 10, but it was like you're going to take that experience and move it forward. Yeah. And so Bill's going to be a great example of talking about that because it is transferable, and everything you do builds on that foundation of who you are as a person and who you are as an employee.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I think the other thing that I learned a lot, and I don't think any one of the three of us have had 10 jobs. I might have, but I don't think any one of the three of us had 10 jobs, is learning what to do and what not to do from the people you work with. Like I learned so much by observation, not sticking my neck out necessarily and correcting or arguing, just listening. And, man, that's a master's class in itself, is just listening. But, okay, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to do that. And so I think the other part of transferable skills to me is to be an observer and a listener and to realize you don't know everything, even though you and I both know everything. But it's good to know that you don't. And so
Well, and I think I would underline that about 10 times because I found at times young people, you'll find this with older people for sure, but young people somehow think they know it all. They've learned everything, they've got their degrees, they're smart people. And boy, that's like the worst thing you could ever come to a conclusion on because you are always learning. And you and I, as we kid, and we impart, we think, our experience onto others. We keep learning by this podcast every time we do
sure.
it. So young people, please do not close down the learning shop. Don't do it until you're 6 feet under, because you're going to learn all the way up to it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. And a really good note on which to introduce Bill and bring on Bill Bergefin, again, head of marketing and creative at the Yes Network. And not the least of which is part of his gloried career. But come on in, Bill. Bill Bergefin, welcome to the Wisdom Circle. How are you?
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. How are the Yankees doing?
Good. They're they came out of the gates pretty darn hot. Started a nice controversy, which is not a horrible thing for marketing, and a good controversy.
Yeah, the torpedo bats.
It was kind of a storybook start after a tough end to the season, and it's hard to say tough end to the season when they lost in the World Series, but the Yankees, that's sort of expected.
Yeah.
So, for them to come out of the gates having a bunch of big injuries and do what they're doing is great.
Right.
Earth a little bit, but won last night. So
good.
All's good.
Good.
Hey, Bill, quick question, and maybe personal. I remember, or confidential. I remember when Yes was first a glimmer in those folks' eyes. Who now is the Yankees the total owner of Yes now, or is there some other partners?
No, Yes is a joint venture between a number of entities, including Amazon, Redbird, and BlackRock.
So shares have moved in and out over the time. I don't want to digress the conversation, but
I'd say the Yankees are majority.
Okay, just want to establish that for people maybe who, they hear of the Yes Network or they're not from the New York area, and it just sort of establishes a little bit.
One last thing on that, though, because this would be an interesting thing for some of our audience who might wonder about Amazon. The way Redbird Capital got it, BlackRock Capital got it, Yankees, yes. But I think my understanding was Amazon bought in when they thought they were building a giant factory in New York, pre getting into the sports business. Is that a rumor, or do you know anything about that?
That's pre me, so I don't know the history there.
Yeah.
But they certainly have dipped their toe into sports.
They were up to their ankles, going up to their knees, going up to their eyeballs. So that's we'll talk about that too, actually. But so again, we've talked about your career. And one of the things that jumped out at me when I gave some thought about you joining us was you launched Versus. I mean, you worked at the RSNs. I think that was one of your, you worked at the Knicks as a ticket seller, then you went to the RSNs in marketing, and then you went to Comcast, if I've got that in the right order. And then you launched Versus, which was pretty damn successful once we got the NHL, because that was like kind of a pin. And now you've just launched the Gotham Sports app, which is a JV, I guess, between Yes, you'll help us, between Yes and MSG. So how does that feel? What was it like? How's it changed?
Oh, good gosh. And to go all the way back, my internship in college was launching one of the first 24-hour regional sports network, Home Team Sports, where during the day it was like Auto Trader and school closings, and then there was the, dare I say, Bullets or Oriole game.
Nice.
And it took it 24 hours when they got syndicated programming, and so that was like my entree into my career. So it's like I've been on launch mode from day one. And even Knicks and Rangers, which storied brands in the world most famous arena. When I got there, it was a tough sell. We were outbound calling, and then they got this guy Pat Riley to coach the Knicks, and this guy Mark Messier to play for the Rangers, and Then it was how fast could you get a credit card out of somebody before you had to move on to the next call. So, that's been sort of a calling card of my career. I think, the biggest change, and I know you talked about it, the adaptability is there's one of the greatest lessons I got from actually my stepfather's great businessman is you just have to kind of demystify stuff because, this digital, it's this big. At the surface, as a marketer, it's I'm looking at a consumer, I'm looking at a product and how to bring it to market, and what that is there's only so many lanes, and how it works. That's what changes, but it's not. I guess to the people who are actually building the things, it's a bit of rocket science. But on the surface, it's at the end of the day, you're providing a service, a product, or an emotional benefit to a consumer. So I think that the biggest thing. And working in Telemundo with you as Hispanic is that demystification of, at the end of the day, they're barriers, and people perceive them as larger than they are. So getting people over the hurdle of someone is like, I'll call myself a legacy television marketer, to be seen as a digital expert, was probably the biggest challenge to overcome, and also the greatest opportunity for me to reinvent.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, all you have to do, and to your point, it's really, what a great word, demystify. Just have to spend some time in it. Short story, when I got to Raycom, it was a very interesting sell because we had different number of games in different markets. And I would tell the new sales guy, if you spend one day working on our product, you know more about it than anybody you're going to call. And I think there's a lot of truth to that in digital. Like it's thank God it's not rocket science on our end, marketing, sales, production. It is maybe on algorithms and technology code, but that's it's a good word, because I think it helps people understand. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of things you might not understand, because you're going to understand it in a pretty short period of time.
Yeah, I think the challenge is for people who are running these enterprises is to understand, and marketing is sort of use a David Hillism, and I'm sure it's taken from a million other people. It's with marketing, half of what we do is what it absolutely drives the business, and the other half is utter crap in many people's eyes, or immeasurable, right, or not measurable.
Right.
And the good news is no one knows which half is which.
Kept us all in business and keeps you in business today.
But you can't hide anymore because of the data. And the other piece is the leadership, because it's this infrastructure and this thing that they don't understand. They go, okay, I want a marketer who's not only a conductor, which is what a CMO should be, but I want them also to be able to play first chair violin. And matter of fact, I need you to know how to build that violin. And to me, that was like kind of okay, I got to get more. I don't know how to build the violin yet, but I got the other two somewhere in that, in that realm. And then, as you were saying, on the job is like, okay, now how do I build a violin?
You're talking about David Hill. It is a marketing thing. When they did NASCAR, he would fight very hard to tell them, you need the black hat and the white hat. You need the bad guy. You need the driver or two that people are rooting against. They want to see bail, they want to see crash, and then the good guys come in and win the day. And it was tough for NASCAR to understand that, but he was trying to tell the story, and create this atmosphere of the cowboy and the bad guys, coming together.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
As you said that, I was sitting here thinking about Star Wars and about White Lotus in 1923, and it's like, I think everything's about black hats and white hats. It's all about the cowboys and the Indians. From every sport, from every game, from everything. It's really simple. It's right.
But it's true. Not even in sports, and you need the straight guy, you need the foil, you need the protagonist, antagonist, and that's what makes for great storytelling. And that's what David Hill was a master.
Bill, I'd be curious as I jump in here. Sorry, is that I always try to tell students, and you can refute this, is because sometimes people try to make everything too complicated, and at the end of the day, marketing is you have a brand, what's its attributes? You have a consumer, how are you going to talk to that consumer that they want to spend time with those attributes? And You can have all the technology and everything around, but at the end of the day, I think it gets down to that very basic communication. What's your thought?
Yeah, at the end of the day, look, we're delivering. You could say, oh, well, we're delivering Yankees games or Nets games, or but you're at the end of the day, you look at it and you go, you're delivering an escape, and you're delivering storylines, and you're delivering something that's bigger, broader, and in the case of the Yankees, has a very defined brand, right? And that sometimes is phenomenal to be able to lever off that. Sometimes, and you probably saw it with Anheuser-Busch and Budweiser. Yeah. You got to maintain the integrity of it, but you also have to try to take it to different places. I think the third pillar I would add to that, I would say, like, what's the brand truth? What's the consumer truth? And then I always like to throw what's going on in the world. And talking about, like, right now is a very interesting time for sure, but that will determine how you take that to market. And I think trying to be able to see around the corner culturally is something that is a force multiplier for when you're bringing a brand or a product forward. So, like in the case of when we launched Versus, it was 2006, 7. Markets are going wild. People are getting their 15th, 19th mortgage on their home, and it was just a very aggressive time. And so when we launched Versus, it was perfect time to launch Versus into, because we got bull riding and Tour de France, which is beautiful but grueling, hockey, which is sort of the toughest team sport in many regards. Sorry, NFL. And so we went at it like hard, and it was a brutally bloody brand. And then, sure enough, market crashes. 2008 happens. Obama, Hope. We shifted and took a very aspirational pull versus push approach. And so you can't just kind of rest on your laurels and say, okay, I understand my product, I understand my consumer. You have to always be kind of looking at what's going on in the world, and otherwise you're going to lose that authenticity, or you're going to miss that.
Yeah, good point.
Was that the birth of the Golf Channel? Let's soften it up a little bit. Well, that's great. How's Gotham doing? I mean, I'm sure it's doing. It's such a great idea.
I'll say gangbusters in many regards. Good. I think again, doing these things, and now after 2 years of being involved in the Yes app, which existed before I got there, it was more about building a direct-to-consumer offering and then building a marketing function and all the tech behind that. Again, that was somewhat new to me. Was great, but now we had to come together with a completely different organization that operated different. They're a publicly held company in a joint venture, and all the people personalities, and build an entirely new mousetrap based on the best of what they had and the best of what we had, and pretty quickly take it to market. So, it definitely, and I always say, it takes a year. It takes at least one full cycle of any product launch to be able for it to, rubber to meet the road, and
sure, whether
it's organizationally or just, maturity of the product and distribution and all of those channels that, so, we've been in it now for less than a year. And I think we're in fantastic shape. The product works well. We're having all the right conversations at this point about from just a pure product and development standpoint. And I think we obviously had a campaign in October around hoops and hockey, and now I think the team is really gelled on the floor. Again, trying to be a coach at a leadership level, and I think we've put out one of our best campaigns, and one of the best campaigns I have in years. And we're seeing the results in sales. We actually peaked at the number 4 most downloaded sports app nationally.
Yeah.
So if you think about that, granted, New York is the number 1 city, but we have a pretty small addressable market when you look at the ESPNs and FanDuels and all, everyone in our category, to be able to rise to that. And Ray, we did that, Telemundo Sports. We got that app. It was 1 and 2 in the app stores. So we're 100% of the market. So we're enjoying it. Yeah, it's going well.
I think the thing you hit on, and Tony, you may feel the same way. And again, I want to make sure we're going back and forth. Is like that 1 year thing. It seems like almost every new deal, every new venture, it's a year. Some people say it's 9 months to a year. And I think that's the whole thing, is who keeps their faith, right? Because you're going to have problems. You're going to have speed bumps, potholes. You might go off the road a little bit, but boy, you got to keep your focus on what you were thinking when you made the plan. And if it was right then, it's probably still right, but you just have to keep the faith, right? And I think that's, again, just trying to pull out the wisdom that you're sharing with us. Talking about other campaigns, let's talk a little about the Premier League and then you know who. So, Tony, that NBC paid a bunch of money to bring a new sport to America on Saturday morning and Sunday morning, which is not prime time for sports viewing. And Bill was at the tip of the spear as it relates to the bringing that out to the viewers and fans of soccer, or non-fans turning them into fans. So tell us a little bit about that. And you know who?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to the idea of, launching things and, looking at them through non-traditional lens. I mean, I love sports as much as this guy, but that wasn't my motivator to get into this industry. I got an internship in college. My father was team dentist for the New York Knicks, got me a job at the Garden out of college, and the rest, was sort of history. So, I didn't know what I didn't know in terms of trying to think within the box of, okay, it's international soccer, who's going to care? I said, there's a white space here where Premier League is the best league play in the world, and it should be the NFL of soccer. Matter of fact, let's not call it soccer. Let's maintain the integrity and call it football, and redefine and recast all that. And I think, again, going back to and Ray, you preached this to me, the uncomfortable being uncomfortable. We had just acquired NBC Sports. It took some convincing to think outside the box. Again, venerable brand that take great pride in contemporizing at NBC Sports, but honoring it. But we had a new product, we had a new audience, and we had to behave differently if we were going to be successful. So, and it just so happened that the ad agency I worked with and dear friend, Guy Barnett, is a Brit but lived in America and grew up a rabid Premier League, football fan. So, and he'd always said, if you ever get Premier League, I'm doing it. Well, we got it, but I had some convincing to do. It's still one of the greatest stories. And John Miller, who I worked for, one of the greatest marketers, certainly in category television of all time. And it was a joy to be able to work for him. I brought Guy in, and, John was like, we can do this. And I'm like, I'm not sure we should do this. Sure, we can, but I'm not sure we should. And I brought Guy in, and he was, halfway through the meeting, which was all about 7 minutes, John just looks and goes, there's this commercial that Frank Luntz, a political pollster, but turned, ad pundit, said was the most successful and effective campaign he had ever seen. And it was for New Era, for Chicago baseball. And it was Craig Robinson and Nick Offerman. And we're sitting at a bar. Do you know that spot? And Guy went, well, of course I do. I wrote it. And John just looked at me, and I said, can we do this now? And he went, yes. So, but working with Guy creatively and strategically, it was like, okay, we knew we had to announce that we have this. We have to reframe the conversation, and how do we've got a rabid audience, but they're small, but they're influential. And how do we make people comfortable with not understanding soccer and seeing it as something that they're going to, make part of their regular sports viewing habit? So we did a bunch of different things, speed it up through the campaign. But the last piece of it was, true to the NBC Sports brand, let's create a comedic NBC SNL, digital short to just take the piss out of Americans not knowing soccer. And we went through the process. It was late in the game, and there's a lot of ins and outs to the story where it probably shouldn't have happened. But again, that just I don't know quit. It's just not it's not in my DNA. Yeah. Eventually, fifth choice, Jason Sudeikis said yes on the 11th hour. Of all the team clubs, Tottenham said yes after I was told, because we'd used them in just about every piece of advertising before that, because that was that was his club. They were the only club after going to the other, every other club that actually had their squad in market. And we put this whole thing together in 2 weeks, put a 4-minute and 42-second piece together, which was a soccer formation. So a little Easter egg in the viral video. And we just organically put it on YouTube. And this is, remember, 2012. Went to on a Thursday night at 1:00 and woke up at 9:00 in the morning and had shot around the world already. And then 10 years later, became one of the biggest TV shows. And I hear rumblings that there's going to be a season 4.
Yeah, I've heard the same. So obviously we're talking about Ted Lasso. This is like Seinfeld. If you watch Seinfeld and talk about it, about 4,000 people helped create Seinfeld. When there were probably like 5. And I just want to say for the record that I know Bill was on top of the list of the names of people who he is the guy who kind of came up with the fish out of water. Let's put a football coach into a soccer team, and good guys, bad guys, right? Cowboys and Indians, whatever you want to say. And it's an enduring brand. And I mean, it made Premier League. I mean, I was just in Brooklyn, and there's bars with flags hanging outside. And there's Saturday mornings, bars are rocking in New York and probably all over the country and world.
Part 2 of this podcast will be available next week. For more information, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com. Thank you.